Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the first early career webinar of 2024. We're very excited for what we have in store for you for the next hour. Let me just double check. Yes, okay. So before we get started, my name is Ala Kolila, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. And I wanted to briefly touch on the Cancer Genomics Consortium, CGC, and the benefits of becoming a member. The CGC is a great society to be involved with, particularly for those early career individuals. There's a smaller annual meeting that happens every year in August, and so it allows more networking opportunities. The annual membership is pretty affordable for trainees compared to other genetic societies. And there are a number of opportunities to be involved with, and you have access to educational resources through the CGC education and GRDC committees. Lastly, for members, the educational webinars are eligible for PACE credits. So there's more information that you can get on the CGC website, but I just wanted to make you aware of these few. All right. Hopefully everyone can hear me. It's hard when you're talking and not getting any feedback, but we'll go ahead and move forward. Again, I'm honored to welcome you all to the CGC Early Career webinar on effective CV and cover letter prep. We are truly really lucky to have our three panelists today representing different career paths within the field of genetics. Our first panelist is Dr. Rhea Bellman. Dr. Bellman is board certified in laboratory genetics and genomics by the American Board of Medical Genetics and Genomics, ABMGG, and she's currently a laboratory director at Vitae. Her operational interests focus on safeguarding data quality and optimizing workflow efficiency to provide high-quality genetic results to patients and providers. Her expertise includes sequencing and structural variant interpretation and reporting using both molecular and cytogenetic technologies, as well as assay validation, product support, process improvement, and ensuring regulatory compliance. Prior to joining Vitae, Dr. Bellman served as a clinical laboratory director at PerkinElmer Genomics and also EGL Genetic Diagnostics. She brings with her 10 years of experience in the clinical diagnostics field from multiple laboratory perspectives, including a clinical laboratory scientist, validation assay development specialist, and clinical laboratory director. Wow, she's phenomenal. She has co-authored several publications as part of the American College of Medical Genetics, Laboratory Quality Assurance Committee, as well as research articles and clinical case studies. Dr. Bellman completed her ABMGG clinical training from Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, and earned her doctoral degree in genetics from Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri. Thank you, Dr. Bellman, for being here today. Our second panelist is Dr. Panya Tariff. Dr. Tariff is a medical geneticist at Memorial Sloan-Kettering Cancer Center. She specializes in cancer genome diagnostics, and her primary clinical responsibilities encompass the analysis and clinical interpretation of complex molecular and cytogenetic results crucial for identifying and diagnosing both hereditary disorders as well as acquired hematologic malignancies and solid tumors. She works closely with oncologists and pathologists to help guide patient personalized care by utilizing her expertise in genomic diagnostics and its implications in the screening, diagnosis, and management of cancer. Furthermore, Dr. Tariff is involved in research, particularly focused on developing and integrating innovative diagnostic techniques. Her research is geared towards enriching our understanding of the genomic landscape of various cancers, aiming to elevate the standard of patient care to its highest levels. Thank you, Dr. Tariff, again for being here with us. And lastly, but certainly not least, we have Dr. Alex Wagner. Dr. Wagner is a principal investigator at the Stephen Cindy Rasmussen Institute for Genomic Medicine at Nationwide Children's Hospital, and also assistant professor in the Department of Pediatrics and Biomedical Informatics at the Ohio State University College of Medicine. His research is focused on the development of tools and standards for advancing precision medicine and our knowledge of genomic alterations in cancer. Dr. Wagner serves as director of the International Variant Interpretation of Cancer Consortium, or you may know it as VIC, co-lead of the Variant Representation Team in the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health, GA4GH, co-lead of the Bridge Center Standards Core for the NIH Bridge 2A program, and member of the HGVS Variant Nomenclature Committee. He is a proponent of open science, yes, fair data sharing, and AI-assisted scalable variant interpretation, which is really the future. Dr. Wagner's research continues to explore new models and tools to address the challenges of variant and genomic knowledge representation. His active projects also include several data standardization efforts supporting variant classification. So we're really lucky today to be able to have representation from those successful in the industry field and the academic space as clinical laboratory directors and also a principal investigator in the research field. So we'll start off today's webinar by giving each panelist some time to speak about CVs and cover letters from their perspective in their space. Dr. Bellman will discuss from the industry space, Dr. Tariff will talk about the perspectives of those in the academic space, and Dr. Wagner will discuss the perspective of those in the research and principal investigator work. Please go ahead and place your Q&A questions in the Q&A box, not in the chat, so we make sure to get everybody's questions. So we'll go ahead and start with Dr. Bellman. Thank you so much again, and we're excited to learn from you.
Thank you so much, Ala. Hello, everyone. My name is Rhea Bellman. I am a laboratory director with Vitae currently, and I'm very glad to be joining you during this panel. A little bit more on the background. I did graduate from Washington University with a PhD in genetics way back when. At that time, I wasn't sure where I was going to go. I decided not to do a postdoc and did research analysis outside of science for some time before realizing that it is where I needed and wanted to be professionally for the long term. So after a few years, I had found clinical genetics as a potential role and path forward, and had begun that career at a small hospital laboratory in St. Louis, Barnes-Jewish Hospital, on the bench, and then quickly went up from there. So with the background with PhD in molecular genetics, I was able to go very quickly into being a validation assay specialist, and then onto the fellowship where I expanded my expertise and then was ready to hit the ground rolling as a clinical laboratory director for first Emory Genetics. So that was at an academic laboratory, and then went from there into industry. So in terms of cover letters and resumes, I'm going to try to put this in the context of the differences between industry and academia. I think that most of you have trained in the LGG fellowship or are currently in the PhD program. And so you may be able to relate to the process that you're going through right now. In a training program, the laboratory directors are the primary point person or team for really assigning out cases in clinical genetics, and then also ensuring that CAP and CLIA regulatory requirements are met and that the workflows and SOPs are reviewed whenever changes are made. Laboratory directors are also involved with troubleshooting things when they go wrong and improving processes, and knowing really where the samples and how the samples transition all the way from when you get it in the lab to making the report on the other side. So in industry, because of the scale, and I'm going to be speaking mainly from kind of a larger volume laboratory perspective, that team of LDs, that those roles become very specialized. And so we may have and do have very different titles and job postings online to fulfill different aspects of what would be considered just all-in-one tasks for a smaller laboratory or an academic one. So for example, we have roles mostly for primarily sign-out functions as a laboratory director, where caseload is going to be the primary focus, and that's going to be the majority of the day spent signing out cases. There are other roles for directors that deal exclusively with operations and troubleshooting. This is where I live, working with quality and ensuring that we're CAP/CLIA compliant as well as ISO, if that's something that the laboratory is also trying to do. And then there's another set of directors who focus on working with biopharmaceutical or research organizations to be able to provide the testing and then publish the data and make clinical guidelines based off of that information. And so given that the responsibilities and tasks become much more focused in industry, what we're looking for in a CV or resume is different from what an academic lab or PI will be looking for. So really the main focus and question from the industry side is, does your resume or CV fit what we're looking for? And by we, I mean not only from the laboratory director perspective. When you submit a CV, of course, it'll first go through the AI filters and then hit an HR recruiter who is going to be looking to see if your objectives on top match the objectives of that particular role. And then that CV is going to be reviewed by a scientific team of people who may or may not have PhDs because the work is so cross-functional. So I wanted to give that perspective first of what we're looking for really is, for our specific role, can we match the things on your CV and cover letter to something that will benefit operations if it's operations, sign out if it's sign out? I could probably go for a little bit longer, but I do want to make sure we have enough time for Q&A. So I'll leave it there, and Hanya can take it away.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bellman. I already have questions in my mind. So yes, we'll hand it over, Dr. Tara. Thank you so much. Oh, Dr. Tara, if you're muted. Yep, no, it's okay. Thank you.
Is that better?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, perfect. So I'm just going to go straight into, CV statement. What is important? What do we typically look for in the academic setting? While CV is a standard way to let the employer know of your qualifications, I personally think it's perhaps a better tool for those who are researchers and have publications and grants to showcase. As a clinical fellow, who's had to learn a wealth of information in 2 to 3 years, and if they were lucky enough, were able to fit, a little bit of lab management, QA/QC skills, you probably didn't have time to work, on a research project, start to finish, and get it published. I certainly didn't. And your past research experience, whether it was during your PhD or postdoc, or if you're an MGP fellow during MD-PhD, may not even be relevant to the job you're aiming for. So, for us, I think the cover letter is of utmost importance. When I get applications, the first thing I do is I read their cover letter or personal statement. Then I go to the CV. Nevertheless, you have to put together a resume. So what do I look for in a CV? When I look at a CV, I don't expect to see high impact publications. If they're there, great, but I don't expect to see it, or grants, or an MBA degree for someone fresh out of fellowship. But what I do look for is to see, what they've done between their PhD and fellowship, where they did their fellowship, which might give me a better picture of their level of training in certain areas, constitutional versus somatic. Then I look for conferences they've attended. Have they been able to present cases in those conferences? Doesn't necessarily have to be oral presentations, but that does help. With many of our conferences now having early bird and trainee sessions, it's become a bit easier to do so, having oral presentations. And really what that tells me is that this individual is motivated and passionate about their work. And that's the most important thing I look for, because most fellows coming out of LGG and MGP fellowships are pretty strong in terms of skills they've learned, right? But passion and motivation is not something you learn in a fellowship, but is very important for patient care. What else I look for in a CV? Have you been involved in validation studies? If so, that's a plus. Personally, I did not have the opportunity during my fellowship, but it can definitely set your CV apart. So you want to make room for those sort of activities in your CV, even if it didn't result in a publication, which it probably doesn't in most cases, but you want to have a section where you can include those sort of experiences. What I did with my CV, and I found to be very useful, was that I had a section for training and techniques, and it was separated by cytogenetics and molecular genetics, and each of those were separated by constitutional versus cancer/somatic. And so for each of those sections, I wrote down who was the chief/director of the division whom I trained under, and the assays I learned to analyze and sign out. So that gives your reader a very quick view of what you know and what they can expect from you, because that's going to be your main job. You're going to be signing out cases, clinical cases. So another thing that is very important for clinical academic positions is teaching, residents, fellows. So you want to show that you want to have a section somewhere in your CV that showcases that. So, if you've taught any lectures during training, or if you've presented at ground rounds, or particularly, case conferences or tumor boards, those can, that should go on your CV. And another thing that is particularly valued in academia is membership in professional societies, like AMP, CGC, ACMG, and it certainly, getting involved in committees or working groups, as a junior member, it can be very valuable on your CV. And it certainly was on mine, because during interviews, it was frequently brought up as to how they value my commitment to the society, because it demonstrates one's awareness and readiness to contribute to the dynamic and evolving field, of genomic medicine. So that's for the CV, just what I look for on the CV. But then it comes to the cover letter, and it's very important. It's a critical component of your application that complements your resume by providing, a more detailed and personalized explanation of why you are the best candidate for the position. It introduces you to the potential employer, and it allows you to personalize your application, highlighting how your specific background, skills, and interests make you a good fit for the position and that particular healthcare facility or academic institute. It provides an opportunity to detail your specific qualifications and experiences that are relevant to the clinical job beyond what is listed in your resume. It helps you emphasize how you can contribute to the team and that patient care in that facility. And another very important part of a personal statement is that it demonstrates your communication skills, which is crucial in healthcare settings. It's crucial everywhere, but particularly in healthcare settings for both patient care and teamwork. So a well-written cover letter can show your ability to convey information clearly and empathetically. It allows you to explain your motivations for wanting to work in the specific clinical role, that you're applying to, and at that healthcare facility, showing your passion and commitment to the field and to providing high quality patient care. It gives you a chance to show that this is very important. It gives you a chance to show that you have researched the organization and understand its culture, values, and goals, and how you see yourself contributing to and fitting within that culture. So it should be at least in part specific to the institute that you're applying to, and not the same for every single place that you apply to. It offers a platform and let me just take a step back. People like people who like them, right? So if you show that you've studied that institute, you know what you're getting yourself into, they value that. It offers a platform for you to address any gaps in your employment history or changes in your career path. Many of us have had that, or other unique circumstances, but in a positive light, explaining how these experiences have prepared you for this clinical role. I definitely took advantage of that in my statement. You should see it as an opportunity to show your enthusiasm for the position and your desire to discuss your application further in an interview. And it ultimately summarizes how you're an ideal candidate for the job, and urging the manager or the director to consider your application seriously and to contact you for further discussion. How it should not be copied from anyone else. It is a personal statement, and it should be exactly that. Otherwise, believe me, it will come across. The reader will know that you did not spend enough time on it, and that right there is telling them how much you care. So, this is just sort of a very brief overview of what I look for in CVs and statements, and what I think helped me during my fellowship. So I will hand it off to Alex.
Thank you, Dr. Tariff. You touched on some things I wasn't aware of that in the academic space they put so much weight on. So thank you. Yes, we'll go ahead with Dr. Wagner. Thank you so much for being here.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm just going to do a quick video and mic check. Everyone can see and hear me. Yes.
Yes, everything looks good.
Great, thank you. All right, so as mentioned in the introduction, I'm a junior faculty member here at Nationwide Children's Hospital and the Ohio State University. I've taken a pretty traditional route to get here. I did my undergraduate training in computer engineering, biology, and mathematics. And then I went on to do some training in a clinical lab before I went on to do graduate school, and I got my PhD in computational genetics. And then I went to study cancer genomics and a postdoctoral training appointment at Washington University in St. Louis. And then ultimately ended up starting my own lab here at the Research Institute at Nationwide Children's. Along the way, I've had to prepare a number of different forms and flavors of CVs and biosketches, and related CV adjacent documents like the NIH biosketch, which you use for research grant applications. And one of the many of the parts of those documents are pretty well known and established. And if you go and you Google guides on how to prepare a CV, you're going to see a lot of the things that Panya mentioned in her introduction a few minutes ago. Things like your research positions, your publications, teaching experience, awards, funding, service. And all of these are, of course, important to showcase and to be exhaustive about, at least in the research setting, because often we see multi-page CVs and there's no real limitation on length. But one of the things that gets lost in the traditional academic CV, and something that I wish I had known earlier in my career, is the role of a sort of like a personal research statement that you can put at the very top of your CV. It talks a bit about your interests and the work that you do and the impact that your previous studies have had in advancing your research goals. Trying to put all of your work into a one paragraph description of your interests and your background and how that relates to them is a really nice way to summarize kind of all of the lengthy lists of publications and job experience and education, et cetera, all of your summarized experience into a neat package that makes it easy for very busy and overworked PIs to take a look at it and understand, what are the key points I should really be, honing in on as I'm looking through your CV. So that's one thing that I think is a very valuable addition to a CV, and something that you should spend a lot of time on. I also want to say that there's often this thought that you have a CV, and I think that's a bit of a misconception. One of the things you should strive to do is to tailor that research statement and highlight, your relevant experience to the types of opportunities you are seeking. And you might find yourself, creating slightly different versions of your CV for different opportunities, or if you're, pursuing, different opportunities at the same time, you might think about ways that you can accentuate different parts of your research background and research interests to help, draw the line, connect the dots for the person that's going to be reviewing your CV. The other thing that you'll do to complement this, of course, is to craft that cover letter. And as a PI, this is one of the most important things I look at when I'm getting, particularly from early career applicants. What's most important to me is a really good cover letter, because what it says is that they have thought carefully, not just about the work that that I do in the lab here and how they might fit into that work, but also conveys to me that they have they understand what's going on and that they have an appreciation for what skills of theirs or interests of theirs are relevant to the work that's going on here in the lab. And so having a strong cover letter that really addresses here are the interests that I have in this opportunity, here's how my background and skills are relevant, and also why it is I think that I'd be a good fit for this role, or why I think I'd get a lot out of this role. These are all helpful things to put into your cover letter and help connect the content of your CV and your experience and your interests to the specific opportunity that you're applying to. So, my general advice is, always think about how you can tailor both the CV as well as this, cover letter to the opportunity that you're thinking about, and to really focus in on creating that, that short summary that highlights your most impactful works, and and of course, if you're early career and you don't have, high impact publications, that's fine. You can talk about just the works that you were most excited about, right? You could talk about, what it is that you're most interested and passionate about. Putting that stuff, right at the front of your CV and trying to draw the line from your experiences to those interests, I think is one of the most helpful things you can do in terms of making yourself an appealing candidate for opportunities in a research lab. And similarly, when you're applying for a research grant and you're building, your bio sketch, which is a very similar document, you'll apply many of these same strategies in crafting your personal statement at the beginning of that bio sketch, because it will serve very much the same role, help connect your experiences to the research proposal or fellowship opportunity, whatever other application you're putting in, to your own personal background. Okay, so I think that's my general recommendations and advice, and I'm looking forward to the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wagner. I think what we're all taking away from this is our cover letters should be well thought out and intentional prior to submitting the application. So if there's one takeaway, that's it. Be very thoughtful and intentional. So we already have a couple of questions that have come in through the Q&A. So thank you so much to all our participants and attendees. Please keep them coming. The first question for our panelists is how to best showcase interprofessional experiences on our CV resume. So yeah, we can have our panelists turn their videos back on and all of us kind of. So how best to showcase interprofessional experiences on our CV and resume? So I think what they're trying to get at is that there's, a lot that goes into working with people outside of your space, and maybe we could highlight the communication, kind of developing plans that incorporate, multi-pronged studies, et cetera. So yeah, any suggestions on how to showcase that on paper?
I can take a swing at this one since I do have interprofessional experience, and I read that the same way in terms of if you've worked in an industry that's separate from the one that you're trying to go into, how do you show that your skills are still relevant from that job and applicable to the one that you have? So in any industry, there are transferable skills and soft skills that are going to be important to know that a candidate has. So those typically focus on communication skills and whether you can write and speak, and also team skills, right? So I think that's pretty universal. Like from the industry standpoint, I want to know that you can work with different teams. Interprofessional, meaning you've worked elsewhere, helps me realize potentially that you have experience and background communicating across different levels of education potentially, or different cohorts of audiences with different backgrounds. And that could come out in that capacity. So for example, I used to work outside of science. I was doing research analysis and editing for sport management, which is completely different from anything that you would see in molecular genetics. And so when I had pivoted my career to go back into genetics, what I wanted to do on my CV and resume was, of course, highlight the most important parts and put them at the top. So my objectives still very much clearly focused on the genetics experience that I had and did not bring at all the data analysis component of sport management. And that took up the very tippy top because I didn't want my application to be tossed out immediately. And so I front loaded my CV with genetics related experiences and validations. And then my interprofessional work, I did put maybe on the second page. And then for the bullet points underneath the title, I had indicated the transferable skills that were used in that space, and then had formatted them such that they could also be applicable to working with a team environment. So worked with X number of people or groups to be able to accomplish X, whether it was a publication or it was saving money on some particular project. But that's how I had handled that particular showcasing on my CV. I wouldn't necessarily bring it up on the cover letter unless, again, you could tie in the skills that you need for the job that you're going for.
Great, thank you so much. I think it's something that we need to think about a lot is these transferable skills. It might not be in the space of science or research, but there are things that can be included. So thank you for the question, thank you, Dr. Bellman, for answering. We have a lot of questions coming in, so we're just going to keep going through. Dr. Tariff, thank you for your information. I have a question for job hunting timeframe. As a 2-year LGG fellow, do you suggest to start job hunting after 1 year of training or at the end of the 2nd year?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, really, I'd say if it depends on if you're applying to a academic job or to a industry job. But I will say that I will certainly not suggest for you to start at the end of the 2nd year. That's a little too late. I personally started at the end of the 1st year. So you want to have some experience so that you know what to put on there, and you want to be able to, because when you're writing a statement, you want to be able to share what you've done already. But also people do know that you're not done with your fellowship, and that's completely okay, and they understand that. So I think sometime in August or September, you definitely want to start, and you want to keep an eye out for, positions popping open. So I know industry positions tend to come in later during the year, but for academic positions, they do start, somewhere July, August, September, you'll start seeing them. I will tell you, I started to work on my statement and on my slides beginning of the 2nd year. So you want to put sufficient time into that. And once those job postings start coming in, then you want to be, quick and apply. So I'd say like around February, I already had my offers. So you definitely do, if you want an academic position, you do not want to wait until the 2nd year, like the end of the 2nd year. You probably want to start closer to the beginning of the 2nd year. That's my suggestion.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Tariff. Hopefully that answers the question. All right, so this is for all panelists. Do any of the panelists have suggestions for what type of experiences trainees should pursue and or highlight in their application documents if they're coming from a basic science background with relevant technical skills knowledge, but perhaps little clinical laboratory experience from their graduate training? So I guess it kind of goes along with what Dr. Bellman was talking about earlier about transferable skills. But any additional comments I think would be helpful.
I will just add that I think it's actually very valuable coming from a basic science background, because even though it's not required for clinical sign out, having that academic mindset and that sort of research mindset does help you to do translational research when you're in your position. And it's always going to be valued, because many of those actually coming with more of a clinical experience might not have that mindset. It might be a little bit more difficult to sort of fall into that, oh, I want to publish, because publications, those are going to be your currency for promotions even down the road. So I think it's very valuable, and highlighting that is actually very important on your statement to say you have that sort of vision.
So it sounds like this question is being asked from a person who's maybe not in the fellowship right now, because people who are in the fellowship will get that clinical experience, and that is sufficient for what is expected after you graduate. But if there are PhDs out there who are not interested in the fellowship and do want to pursue a role in the clinical space, industry does hire not only for sign-out roles, but other technical roles as well, and variant analysis and interpretation are their own particular career paths. We need people who can do laboratory operations. A scientific background that is specific for the assays that are used would go a long way in being able to run the assays, but not only run the assays, troubleshoot, lead teams. So there are these other options as well outside of the clinical laboratory. If you're trying to get into the clinical lab space, then I would try to Oh, here's what I did. How about this? When I was outside of science and trying to get back in, specifically into the clinical lab space, what I had done was I started doing informational interviews with people who I knew were clinical geneticists or clinical chemistry, clinical something. And I was able to get great advice and even mentors that I still know and love who've helped me make that transition into the clinical space. I started going to clinical laboratory seminars at the local university to be able to understand what was needed more. And I also sought out certifications so that I could put on my CV that I was actively studying even on my own time. So, for example, the American Association of Clinical Chemistry used to have, and they might still have, molecular pathology certificate programs that you can accomplish on your own, even outside of a clinical laboratory. And that type of self-motivated, and if I saw that on a CV, I'm a little biased, of course, but it would tell me that that person is trying to make steps to go into a particular industry, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the things that I'm mentioning, but there are ways to take steps to get into the clinical side or any industry if you're looking.
Great, thank you so much. We have another question, which we'll start with Dr. Wagner, and then if anybody else has anything to add. Can you please provide a few pointers on answering what are your strengths and weakness question? I think everybody's faced that question before.
That's a very good question. And the answer to it, of course, is it's challenging. It's based off of your own, personal strengths and weaknesses. But, honestly, one of the things that people are looking for when they ask this question is how aware are you of, some of your own shortcomings, and, how do you see these in terms of opportunities for growth? So if you frame the answer to this question in as a way of saying, okay, I'll give you an example for myself. If somebody were to ask me this, I'd say, one of my weaknesses is that I tend to find myself having difficulty like keeping everything up in the air, right? I'm very busy. I have a lot of different projects, and keeping track of everything is a challenge. And so, one of the ways that I've been working on this is by, developing some organizational tools that help me, work through my to-do list, so to speak, in a way that lets me, stay on task, stay organized and focused. And the idea here is to basically make it clear, yes, I know this is something that I struggle with, and also here's how I've been working on it and trying to grow in that way. And then as for your strengths, trying to show what your strengths are with respect to the types of things your interviewer is looking for is a good strategy. So, if you're going into a role that's like a team lead position, talking more about your management strengths might be helpful. I ran a team of, 3 graduate students or something like that. And we, worked on this project, and, I was in charge of making sure that people got their various deliverables done, et cetera. Talking about your role as it pertains to what it is you're applying to is a great way to answer the strengths question.
Great, thank you so much. Kind of related to that question, another one was asked, almost every interview starts with, tell me about yourself. What should the answer include? Strictly professional information, combination of personal and professional? I'm sure all 3 of you have been involved in interviewing people. What are you actually looking for in that question?
I'll start again and then but I'll be brief. What I usually look for in this is inviting the applicant to give me a summary of what they view are the most pertinent parts of their background to what we're talking about that day. So I don't expect them to tell me where they were born and raised. I do expect them to tell me about their, relevant work in their undergraduate training that got them interested in the area of genetics or variant interpretation. And I expect them to tell me about like some of the work that they've done along the way. They worked in maybe a research lab, and while they were there, they started learning about the HGVS nomenclature. They thought that was really interesting, how you can define these things with this structured syntax, and they wanted to learn more about how do people model that or build that. If you give that type of, here's what I did, and make it connect it to what it is you're talking about that day with your interviewer, it's going to be a really strong answer to that opening question.
Yeah, I think that that's helpful to know you're not looking for where we were born and raised. Dr.
I will also add that
Yes.
a lot of times when someone asks you that question, they're looking for what to ask you. So that's your introduction is going to give them things to ask about. So personally, sometimes I've had like a cover letter or a CV come to me and I can't think of anything in particular I want to know, but when I ask that question, they just open doors. So if there's something you want to highlight about yourself, that's the place to do it.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice. If anyone's taking notes, write that down right there. All right, wonderful. We have another question come in. How can I convince the panel about my ongoing work without publications? I am a postdoc at WashU working on a breast cancer project. Although we are in a developing stage and have obtained some preliminary results, I haven't published yet. I'm planning to write a fellowship, but I am unsure about how to effectively convince them. And I can submit one-page research statement in my CV. Any suggestions would be appreciated. I think the crux of this question is really about, how do you get to your next step when you haven't maybe reached all of your goals, and the big ones are publications, and how to convince kind of your committee. I don't think this is exactly a committee, but your mentoring group or your team to support you in getting to this next stage. For the person that asked that question, hopefully that's kind of what you were getting at, but we'll go from there. Yes, Dr. Wagner.
Often through no fault of their own, people that submit, manuscripts for publication often have to wait for a very long time to see those published. This is just part of an academic reality today. Part of it is, the burden on reviewers grows all the time. We just have increasingly more requests to review papers and decreasing amounts of time to spend doing so. And so the length of time to publication can get quite long. And people that are in these short-term training positions that are looking to advance, but might not have had their work published yet, can sometimes feel stuck. One of the strategies to mitigate this is through writing up your work and submitting it as a preprint to a service like bioRxiv. And, in recognition of the reality of things today, often this is acceptable to, for example, funding agencies as a marker of progress in your area. Now, a peer-reviewed publication is always going to be better than the corresponding preprint, but it is a nice step in the direction that shows, hey, look, I've done this work. You can go take a look at it yourself if you're interested in me. And you can assess what it is I've done because it's out there in this structured manuscript format. So that's one step you could take to help kind of close this gap.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right, we have another question specifically about lab directors. My interests are in cancer genetics, but my lab is very strong in cyto and not so much molecular. How do I tailor my cover letter and CV in a way that will make me land an interview? Or what experiences do you look for in this case to show passion? I think this is a common reality. Sometimes you're in a lab that's strong in one thing and that's what you get exposure to. So yeah, any help, suggestions for this person?
I can take that since I do primarily cancer. So we are all aware that different fellowships have different strengths. Some are very cyto-focused, others are more molecular, some are more constitutional, just depending on the patient population that they have. That's a reality we're all aware of, and we don't expect you to have like a very strong experience in one area versus the other. Now, sometimes, and that's what I did for our fellowship when I was a fellow, is you can ask your fellowship director to tailor it slightly such that you're touching what you need, but also you say, like, this is what I said. I said, I'm interested in somatic. Can I get 3 months of extra somatic molecular sign out? And typically they will make that work for you if there is a laboratory that's actually doing the work. If not, maybe there's another laboratory within that city. Like, for instance, you know, if you're at, I'm just saying, like, you're in a laboratory that does constitutional in that same city, there's a different, I'm not going to bring names, but that, like, there's a different laboratory that does more cancer. You can maybe talk to your director and ask for them to have a rotation for you. That's one thing that I did during my fellowship. So I wanted to get experience on Archer. Brigham did not have Archer. I was primarily based at Brigham and Women's Hospital. I asked for our director to talk with someone at MGH. I was able to go there for a full week. It was not part of the fellowship training, but I got that experience. I got, you know, and you need to think ahead, and you need to think about ways to show that you knew you're interested in that, not just I'm interested, but I didn't do anything about it. So if you do that and you put that on your, and like I mentioned in your CV, you have your experiences and skills and what you've trained. When you put what you've trained and you say, this is like cancer, this is what I did, I had this many months of this rotation and this rotation, that's right there telling that person that you were interested and you took steps to sort of build your experience in that area.
Thank you. I'll add to that, Dr. Tariff is spot on. Even in industry, we know that all the fellowships don't have extensive coverage across all somatic, all molecular, all germline, all cancer. And so if you could highlight the additional training experiences that you're trying to get, or the ones that you do have, even if they're limited, in your cover letter, and focus on that being your primary interest, I think that'll go a long way as well. So my company, we look only at germline, maybe hereditary cancer, but it's germline really, and mostly molecular. And so having a cyto only focus would be a damper, but I know that in a fellowship you have at least some exposure to molecular, so you can put those elements really towards the top and then use your CV to say, I am primarily interested in doing XYZ in molecular, and here's why. You can even roll in projects or stories from your training that support that interest as well.
That's super helpful. Thank you both so much. So we have another question. Any tips for passing your CV from the initial phase of AI settings? How do we get past the computer?
We don't have a computer AI thing, so I'm just going to leave it to Rhea.
I think we do, but I'm not sure how it works. So I can only give the general advice of look at the objectives and try to put in some keywords. Here's something that you should not do, because there are kitschy ways to get around AI. One of them that I'd heard of was called white fonting, where you copy and paste the objectives from the job posting and put them in your CV, but in white, so that you are for sure hitting the keywords. This doesn't really work. Because your CV and resume still have to stand out on their own. Additionally, you have no idea what's going on the back end of the AI programs. And sometimes what can happen is any text in your CV can be parsed into different areas of the user interface for the HR department. And so that white font could very easily turn into something visible. So don't do that.
I would add, just for a more generalized form of this question, like, how can I make sure that my application is being seen by the hiring manager? One thing you might also do if you have an idea about who that is send a follow-up email and just say, hey, I just want you to know I saw this posting. I presume you're the person hiring for it. I found the role to be very exciting. I've submitted my application through the job portal, and I hope that I'll hear back from you, something to that effect. when people do this, it sends a very strong message that they are very interested in the role, that they're very focused, that they know what they're doing. It says a lot just in terms about general competency, as well as an interest in what it is that job posting is describing. So that's one very effective way to make sure that if you are getting screened out by AI or just by a person in HR and not necessarily the hiring manager, that this is a way that might get rescued. I will also I'll give an anecdote about somebody who once emailed the entire department about their interest in a role, which ultimately they did get hired, but it's certainly been a point of discussion ever since. So I'd recommend you try and make it a very focused email.
I will just say that that is spot on, Alex. And I have never applied to a position where I have not also sent an email to that individual saying I applied to the position. But one thing to also say, and I'm not saying to do this for every place, but if there's one or two places that you're extremely interested in, and I've done this before, you can send an email before applying. So email them, let them know that you're interested and would like to learn more about it, and would like to, that really sets you apart. This person and people know that you're not going to do that for every single place. So it just really gives them that signal that I'm very interested in this position. I've done it before. I've only done it for like one or two places. I wouldn't recommend doing it for every place. And you might not get a response too. That also happens. Don't be discouraged. But that's also a way to at least, even if they're not available to maybe speak with you, which they typically are, I will say, because people know that you're applying for a position, you're going to be their colleague, right? So they're typically open to it, but even if they're not, they might give you some more information, and that can help you, in before applying and having sort of a better idea of how to customize your statement in your application.
Yeah, that's so helpful. Be bold and when it's right. There was a follow-up question to this, and maybe Dr. Bellman, you can answer. In industrial jobs, you can't always see the option of the hiring manager, even know who to contact. So what do you suggest in that case? Just, reach out to someone there and hope they'll connect you to the right person, or what do you recommend?
I'm going to be speaking specifically for lab director roles in the clinical space. The community is small enough that you probably know someone who knows someone. I would ask your mentor or training PI professors to maybe reach out and see in their network who might be working at that particular company to be able to connect you. And in absence of that, it doesn't hurt to try to contact someone at the company, or maybe someone who's maybe not even on the hiring team, but if you know a friend who's already working there, to be able to reach out. You can also contact HR directly. They may or may not give you additional information.
That's super helpful. I will mention, I actually met Dr. Bellman through LinkedIn. I LinkedIn messaged her and she responded. So, other avenues can be helpful as well. I think that was the first time we met a couple years ago. All right, we have a couple more questions. Dr. Tara, you mentioned about handling gaps on resumes. Can you please provide some specific guidance on that, specifically if the gap was due to personal reasons?
Yeah, so I think gaps are more important when it's between your, let's say, PhD or postdoc and then your fellowship. You kind of want to explain what you were doing there when you're applying to a fellowship. Now, after your fellowship, typically you're applying to the job right after it. If you took like a leave, maternity leave or something, that's completely acceptable. You don't even have to explain that, right? Like it happens. So I think when we're talking about gaps, it's mostly what were you doing in the 5 years between PhD and applying to a clinical fellowship? Explain that. What I will say is you need to be creative. You don't always, you have to find a way to show, and you don't have to, like, don't put on your statement that I took time off to go visit family and somewhere else. Like, you don't, you don't do that. Just like be very creative about it. If it was a personal reason because of health issues or like a family, you don't really need to explain that. If it was 1 year, people understand that. But if it was like a big stretch of time, you want to be creative to explain what you were doing. You could say I was involved in professional, personal development or something. You have to find ways to sort of explain exactly why you were not, if it was right after fellowship. Again, between PhD and fellowship, you don't need to explain that gap after fellowship because that's already done. You're in your fellowship now. But if there was a gap after finishing your fellowship and then it's 4 years from then and now you're applying to a job, you kind of need to be creative in saying what you were doing in the time being.
That's really helpful. Thank you so much. All right, we have one more question about interviews, but we're going to save it because a future webinar will be coming soon around interviews in general. So I just want in the last 2 minutes to inform you all of a great event coming up. We have coffee break sessions with CGC mentors coming April and May. Again, we have access to CGC gives you access to the experts in the field, and so we have mentors coming in from across the country that will be part of this coffee break. So coming this April, May, put this on your calendar. We'll end with a thank you to all. Thank you to our panelists. I learned so much. I took some notes here. So thank you. It was just so enlightening having the 3 perspectives, someone as a principal investigator, like you made it. And also our clinical laboratory directors in their respective spaces, the heavy hitters. So thank you all so much for being here and making time for our early career members. For those that attended, please fill out the survey. We really appreciate your feedback and, about what you would like to see in the future. So thank you all so much. And we hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Dr. Tariff, Dr. Wagner, Dr. Bellman. Thank you so much.